Hello, my name is Mary Hesdorfer. I'm the Executive Director and a nurse practitioner for the Mesothelioma Applied Research Foundation. I'm very pleased to introduce to you our Meet the Mesothelioma Experts series. This one focuses on legal. I'd like to thank the law firm of MRHFM, a nationwide firm that is charged with litigation issues surrounding mesothelioma. As a foundation, our area of expertise is medical. And oftentimes we're asked questions about the legal field, questions to do with people's cases, whether to bring a case, how to bring a case. And it just really falls, outside of my area of expertise and those of my staff and my board members. So we are bringing the legal experts to you to help you as you're making some of these tough decisions, and to make sure that, you are as successful as possible in your mesothelioma litigation. So I'd like to thank the firm. Also, they are one of our sponsors this year, along with other representatives from the legal profession, medical profession, pharmaceutical, business community, and of course, our community itself, who provide funding and donations to help keep these programs running and effective. So again, I hope that the information brought to you is timely, that it helps you, and that we're answering and meeting the needs of the mesothelioma community.
Okay, welcome everybody to our session today, our Meet the Experts session. I am Dr. James Stevenson. I am a thoracic medical oncologist at the Cleveland Clinic. I'm also on the Foundation's Board of Directors. So happy to be leading this discussion today. That's going to revolve around legal questions related to the diagnosis of mesothelioma. And we have a group of experts, legal experts with us here today that are really going to provide some great insight for us. And I'm looking forward to that. We start with some introductions for the panel.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Christian Hartley. I'm one of the founding partners at Maune, Raichle, Hartley, French, and Mudd. And hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions for you today.
Hi, I'm David Amell. I am a partner here at Maune, Raichle, Hartley, French, and Mudd. I practice in California, and I'm hopeful that we can provide some responsive information for folks.
Hi, I'm Dawn Bestermann. I am a partner at what I call MRHFM because Maune, Raichle, Hartley, French, and Mudd is a mouthful. I practice here in our Tampa, Florida office, and I am thrilled to be here today to hopefully provide some answers to folks who are tuning in who have a lot of questions about legal representation in these cases.
Great. And thanks again for being with us today. The other thing I just want to lead off with here is a statement that's on the Foundation's website that I think is a great backdrop to our conversation today. And I'm reading this right from the website. The Mesothelioma Applied Research Foundation believes that all mesothelioma patients are entitled to and should seek legal counsel. So with that as again, sort of a theme, when I'm sitting in the office with a mesothelioma patient at that first visit, of course, there's lots of questions about their disease. Frequently, there's a lot of misinformation from lots of angles, medical, because they might have seen providers who maybe don't see much mesothelioma, don't know how to treat it or what it is, what the prognosis might be. So frequently, patients and families, really will just have lots of unfounded, thoughts that are not correct in terms of how we can treat this disease and what the prognosis might be. And and I hear the same thing, when we talk maybe about any seeking representation. So some of the initial questions I get are, do you think I have a case or a claim, and then where should I start? How do I, do you know a lawyer? They ask me. So I think that starting point is really critical. Or patients are at they're at a very it's a very emotional time, and probably tough for them to make decisions. And so where should a patient start when after they had a diagnosis of mesothelioma? Should they decide for themselves whether they think they have a case or a claim?
Yeah, doctor, and I can jump in on this a little bit. That you hit the nail on the head. You know, that initial diagnosis is such a difficult time for mesothelioma patients and their families. And it's so critical at that time that not only do they seek out the best medical advice and treatment, but also that they seek out legal advice and legal representation by specialists. You know, just as it's important that a person with mesothelioma obtain medical treatment and medical advice from a specialist such as yourself, it's important that a person with mesothelioma seek legal representation from law firms that specialize in mesothelioma cases. These cases are difficult and they require significant expertise and experience in order to proceed and be successful. That expertise and experience tends to be beyond what a general practitioner has. So it's important that if you've been diagnosed with mesothelioma, you obtain representation from a law firm that specializes in mesothelioma. And you know, one of the questions you asked is, should the patient determine whether they have a case? Often we have instances where a client will be hesitant to contact us because they're just simply not aware of where they may have been exposed to asbestos. And you know, that's again where the expertise of firms such as ours comes into play. We will do a thorough investigation and make a determination of where somebody may have been exposed to asbestos. And often our clients have no idea that they were working around an asbestos-containing product. And I'll give you an example of this. We represented an individual, a gentleman who was a chemist, and he had worked for a paint company in formulating paint. He knew all the materials that he worked with, and he was adamant that he did not work with asbestos. But what he did not know was that the talc that he was mixing into these paint formulations was an asbestos-containing talc. He could have never known that. But what we were able to determine was the source of that talc. It was a mine in the Death Valley region of California. We went out, we sampled the talc, we had it tested, we got ore from the talc mine, and we were able to determine that the talc itself contained some 10% of asbestos. This was something that our client could have never known. That's an example of an instance where if the client would have delayed or thought that they didn't have a case because they could not recall an occupational exposure to asbestos, we would have never been able to get the very substantial recovery that we obtained for them.
Wow, that's a great example of that question of, you know, do I have a case? And you know, because again, frequently my conversations with patients, sometimes it's obvious that they, you know, we're in a workplace where there is asbestos, but other times they'll say to me, "Nah, there was no asbestos," but you know, like you mentioned, or I worked around this and that, you know, and maybe even, and they ask me, I think, is there asbestos in such and such? And I don't even know, right? So, yeah, I think, right. I mean, there certainly is no downside to seeking representation with experts like yourselves, right?
There certainly isn't, and it's a free, you know, we certainly meet with potential clients. It's free, there's no cost to them, and we do a thorough job investigating. We have a lot of resources available to us. We've built up a library of documents that identify asbestos in different products that maybe, you know, many people did not realize contained asbestos. Another example that I recently had was working with an electrician who did not understand that some of the plastic materials, such as arc chutes that he was working with, contained asbestos. And this is an electrician, somebody who worked in their field for a very long time. but we know this because we've been doing it for some period of time. We have resources available to us. There's no cost to a client, no cost to your patients to seeking out some advice in this regard, and we'll give, you know, our potential clients a fair assessment of where we think we can obtain recovery for them.
And I think the other, just to highlight the other thing that you mentioned as, to start was that you're experts in mesothelioma litigation. And again, just as given that this is a rare disease, just as you want to be seeing, as these folks should be seeing physicians that have expertise in mesothelioma to hopefully get them the best outcomes or the most treatment options, then again, you know, that's just as important on the legal side as well. That's obvious, I think, right?
Yeah.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead,
I
Don.
I just wanted to add on to Dave's explanation. You know, we often, like you do, doctor, when a client first contacts us, their first question is, do I even have a case? You know, for a lot of our clients, the manner of exposure, the products to which they were exposed is readily apparent to some of our clients. They come to us with knowledge of how they were exposed and to what products, but often, like we've been discussing, people just simply don't know. And do I have a case? That question, the answer is almost always yes. It is extremely rare that we are unable to get any sort of financial recovery for our clients. And going back to the point that Dave made with respect to expertise, it's so important in these cases that clients meet with attorneys who are experts, who handle these cases on a daily basis and have the resources to do the type of investigation that needs to be done. For instance, at our firm, every client that we meet with, after that initial meeting, the very next step is they meet with an investigator. And our investigators are specifically trained to uncover all potential exposures that someone may have had. And the reality is that in most of these cases, victims aren't exposed to just one product or exposed during one part of their life. There's usually decades of exposure, sometimes through their work, sometimes through personal activities, sometimes during a period of their lifetime when they lived with someone else in the same household who brought in asbestos from their occupational exposures. And what we do is investigate a person's entire history. So we go back to day one. We start at birth and we investigate the client's entire life history to try to determine every single source of exposure, because every single source of exposure also represents potentially an additional source of recovery.
And the other thing I wanted to check about was, you know, getting to an expert, right? Which is so important, and the paths that patients and families take to get to medical and legal experts, or there's some that never make it, right? I mean, how can people be sure that they could, you know, get to folks like you? I understand a little bit about the legal referral process, and is it okay for them to just start with a lawyer that they work with for family matters and then hopefully get referred on, or should they independently seek experts like you? What do you think the best path is?
You know, I think that they should try to seek if they have a family friend, somebody who's a lawyer, hopefully that person gives them some good advice to seek a national firm that specializes in mesothelioma cases. One of the things that's very important when a mesothelioma patient is initially meeting with a law firm and a lawyer is to determine whether that individual is part of a firm that's going to handle their case from inception on through settlement or trial, or whether it's somebody who's going to refer the case to another firm, maybe one that they are not comfortable with and they haven't met. But I think it is an important, and certainly there is information, for example, through the foundation and through other sources out there, wherein a mesothelioma patient can find their way to a reputable firm that specializes in mesothelioma.
Yeah, one of the things that when we started this firm, many of us who started the firm came from other places and worked other places. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to sort of change the way business was being done so that our clients were getting represented by people who had enough time, who had the time to focus on the actual clients. Many of us came from places where we felt like we weren't given the time to give the individual attention to these clients, because these cases are, very, very complex. If you don't spend the time, if you don't have the teamwork that we have, you're going to have situations where things can get missed. And so that was one of the things that really brought this firm together, and it's really just continued in the last 10 years. We have, I think, really honed our ability to efficiently provide the kind of representation that people with mesothelioma deserve, because their time is valuable, and these cases need to move quickly and efficiently, and we need to have the most thorough investigation in that short amount of time so as to get things into a path for resolution for our clients as soon as possible. And I really, I really am proud of the lawyers that we have and the work that they do this way, and the commitment, and it's really been mutually beneficial, I think, for our clients and for our firm, because we can actually take a great deal of pride in helping our clients.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest, Doctor, that for every patient and family who's considering hiring legal representation, there's a number of questions that they should ask each attorney that they're considering to hire. And, those questions are simple and will, I think, give the patient a real insight into how the firm that they're considering operates, how they handle these cases, and the type of personal attention that the client and the family get. I think it's important to ask who's going to be involved in the case from day one. Who is meeting with the client at that very initial meeting? Is it even an attorney? Is it a first-year associate, or is it a partner? These are, like Christian has said, extremely complex cases. And a lot of times, you work these cases and ultimately the goal is to try to resolve them without a trial. But in some situations, we have to go to trial. And I think the last thing you want to find yourself in as a client is in a situation where you're meeting the attorney who's trying the case right before trial. So who's going to be involved in the case? Who's overseeing the case as it's being worked up? Ask the person who you're meeting with how many cases each attorney typically handles in a year. Our attorneys handle between, on average, 6 to 8 cases a year. Other firms, their lawyers may handle dozens of cases. And I think that the number of cases goes back to what Christian was saying in terms of how much time is that person really going to have to devote individualized attention to your case. I think that those types of questions really help someone who obviously they're coming to this situation with most of the time very, very limited experience in legal matters and in choosing a lawyer. And those are important questions, I think, that will help guide them to a firm that's going to provide the type of attention and dedication that I think all of these cases require.
Yeah, those sound very similar to a lot of the questions that I get. So a lot of similarities here. And just to echo the point about time and you know, the initial concern for these patients are, you know, and families are going to be, you know, their treatments and getting through those, and whether it's surgery or drug therapies or other things like radiation, you know, making sure that, you know, that would take precedence, while, you know, that they would be able to devote the time they need to their medical therapies, and hopefully while again, while experts like you are managing the legal side, you know, without hopefully needing too much of their time.
That's very much a concern of ours. We're always conscious of the fact that, you know, our clients' #1 priority is their health and their treatment. And we work with our clients to ensure that the litigation process doesn't in no way interfere with their treatment or what they have to do for their own health. Sometimes clients are concerned, they want to get through medical treatments before they start the legal process. I think that's not, I think that is a mistake. I think it's important because it can impact the case. I think it's important to proceed with the legal case as quickly as possible after receiving the diagnosis of mesothelioma.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, a lot of, you know, when we meet with clients for the first times, you know, many of them are very concerned. They don't want to be spending their time while they're sick, being in a trial or things like that. In many cases, our clients never go to court, but their trial, they actually can still have a trial. And it really is just going to depend on the situation, how they're doing. But the process, you know, should not scare off people from trying to seek remedies for their injuries here, because it can be managed in a way that will not adversely affect them with a minimal amount of time, so that they can still take care of their rights and themselves, more importantly themselves, of course. But there is a balance that can be had, and we, you know, after doing this for 27 years, I've learned that we need to have a balance, and it has to be a patient-client-centered balance for sure.
Yeah, so important to note that these things can happen in parallel, right?
Very much so.
Yeah, it's important. Maybe a little bit more of a difficult question in terms of hitting home, but, you know, we know that mesothelioma is a cancer that, you know, is eventually fatal for most of our patients. And if, you know, somebody dies in the midst of their case, what happens then? Or can you bring a case after somebody dies? What happens in those instances?
So if we've already filed a case for a client and that individual passes away during the course of their case, the law allows us to substitute in a plaintiff to continue the prosecution of those claims. Most often it is a spouse that will continue to litigate the matter. Sometimes it's the children. In a situation where someone passes away before legal representation was ever before an attorney was ever hired, that case will become what's known as a wrongful death case, and the survivors of that individual have the authority under the law to bring a case in court or to file trust claims relating to their loved ones' exposures. It is important, however, to take into account that when that happens, there are limitations of time. There are deadlines by which those cases must be filed. So that's another reason why it is so important in these situations that people don't delay seeking legal representation following a diagnosis, because there are deadlines. And unfortunately, if those deadlines aren't met, if claims are not timely filed, then there just simply is no way to get recovery in those circumstances.
And just to add to that a little bit, Doctor, it's certainly always our goal to get the case resolved while our client is still living and hopefully still healthy enough to enjoy some of the results. We're fortunate out here in California that there is a statute that provides for trial preference for our clients who have mesothelioma, and we can typically get their case to trial within 4 to 6 months of the diagnosis or of the retention.
And I would add that it's important the sooner that people come, they come to see you or other medical professionals, the sooner they get to Dave or to someone whose office is able to go through all of the steps. And there are many steps that need to be done in rapid order in order to get that trial that quickly. That's one of the things that when people are looking, if they're looking at different law firms, making sure that the office is set up so that they can meet all of the requirements that will allow you to get that trial quickly. And I will say I have been very impressed with our office in California being able to do that, because it is quite an endeavor to get a lawsuit ready. In many states, lawsuits take years, and in California, our office is getting the same amount of stuff done in 3 to 4 months in order to get that 4 to 6 month trial setting. And if you're asking, look at the law firms that you're considering and see whether they can actually live up to that, because it is a very onerous process and has to be done exactly right in order to take advantage of that statute.
And what does the future of asbestos litigation look like? Sometimes I'll hear people say, "Oh, isn't the money going to run out?" But what do we know about that?
Well, I don't know that we know the answer to that, but as I said, I've been doing this since 1994. I think it's 27 years now. And since my first day as an asbestos lawyer, I was told that this litigation will run its course in 5 years and there will be no more cases. And what I've learned is that that's just not correct. And I could say that now, and I would be wrong if I said it. And if I listened to what we know is that, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but Dave already mentioned Talc cases, and we've learned that only in the last few years, my 27 years, it was only in the last 3 or 4 years where it really came to light through ultra-sensitive testing, state-of-the-art testing, that talc products that were sold to consumers like baby powder, Johnson's baby powder, other, Johnson's shower to shower, other body powders, face powders, makeups, things like that, have contained asbestos historically. And some, as we've seen, even very recently, the FDA found asbestos in Johnson & Johnson's cosmetic talc and in other talc products. And so I guess we don't consider them the historic asbestos litigation, but ultimately it is asbestos litigation. They were knowingly selling asbestos containing products. And so unfortunately, sadly, until until people in your field are able to unlock the key that prevents this cancer, or find that treatment that is going to act like a vaccine, or we're going to continue to see mesothelioma cases. And as one epidemiologist in a trial I had with Johnson & Johnson testified, when you expose hundreds of millions of people to small amounts of asbestos in baby powder over dozens and dozens of years, some mesotheliomas are inevitable. None of those people will get mesothelioma, but some of them inevitably will, and that's the tragedy of it. So unfortunately, this is going to keep going. Now, not every case, even if most people are exposed to asbestos from cosmetic talcs like baby powder or some other powder over their lives, most of those people probably wouldn't want to bring a claim against for those tiny exposures. But in some cases, that's the right thing to do, and we will balance that. And experienced lawyers will balance the what's the best case to bring by doing the in-depth investigation that Dawn was talking about.
So there are, again, just expanding on that, there are exposures outside of the workplace that are legitimate and that are leading to claims.
Very, very much so. In fact, Christian just tried a case here in California with us on behalf of a gentleman who was exposed to asbestos that his brother brought into the family home. His brother worked for a local utility, and he worked around repairing asbestos cement pipe in the 1980s, in the late 80s. And our client was exposed to asbestos dust brought into the home unknowingly by his brother. And the jury found that was a substantial factor in causing our client's disease. So there are many instances where somebody can be exposed to levels of asbestos that are not in the occupational realm, so to speak, that they may not even be aware of. And that's certainly something that we unearth.
It's interesting that what you mentioned about, how long you've been doing this and that you continue to lead litigation. And I heard the same thing, 20 years ago as well, that, the mesothelioma cases, we all saw even, curves that were going down, that we'd see less and less cases, but that hasn't happened 20 years later, right? It's been very steady. We haven't really seen a downtick at all. In most of the data that I've seen. So again, it's going to continue to be an issue, a disease that we'll see. Hopefully, obviously, have better outlook from a treatment perspective. But again, it's a shame, but it's just not going away.
Yeah, it's following up on what your last question. I think it's clear that as time is going by, some things that we anticipated, in the 1980s and 1990s are coming true, that you're seeing fewer and fewer people who were working in traditional asbestos jobs like insulators, because those people, they have passed away from asbestos related diseases. But what's unfortunate, tragic, but nonetheless clearly true, is that there are other exposures that have taken the place of those cases. I tried a case in New York City for a woman whose only exposure to asbestos was Johnson's baby powder. And I've seen cases where someone's only exposure to asbestos was their dad working, doing automotive work in their driveway for money, to make money on the weekends. And sometimes people who only redid their house, their basement when they were children, and they used asbestos containing drywall materials, and they did it just for a short time. And that's why, going back also to the idea of like people sometimes think, oh, I just don't have a case. what we've learned from the medical and scientific field is that, you know, the greater the exposure to asbestos, the greater the risk. But even a little bit of exposure can be enough risk for some people, unfortunately. And so we, you know, we look at the literature, and it's over and over again, epidemiologists, physicians, scientists are saying, you know, there's no identifiable safe exposure to asbestos. And, you know, I think that can't be more underscored by the information that's come out about talc, the publications that have shown people, hundreds of people with their only exposure to asbestos with cosmetic talc developing mesothelioma later in life. You know, and again, people also, you know, maybe don't understand the delay between the time of exposure and then developing the cancer many years later. But that's another thing that, you know, we've learned how to teach juries when the time comes if we have to, but also to understanding the case and, you know, what case to bring and how to approach it to make sure we can do the best for maximizing the client's recovery.
One thing I wanted to touch on as well would be what veterans, service veterans who might have been exposed, should their path be different than somebody who was exposed, say, you know, working in a, you know, foundry at a steel mill, or how are veterans different?
So often with veterans, there is exposure that occurs during the course of their service in the armed forces. But frequently, once they get out of the military, they continue to have additional exposures, whether that's through second occupation or through doing things like automotive work or home remodeling. So often with our veteran clients, we're able to pursue several different types of claims. So the traditional civil claims, bankruptcy trust claims, but veterans who were exposed during the course of their service also have the ability to file a claim for disability benefits through the Veterans Administration. And that is something that we at our firm handle on behalf of our veterans clients. We will work with the veteran to identify the sources of their exposure during the course of their service, and we will put together all of the evidence that's required to successfully file a claim with the VA. And we have attorneys and an entire department that handles the filing and processing of those claims. We also will handle appeals or requests for supplemental information from the VA in order to make sure that those claims ultimately get approved. And for folks who served and were exposed during their service, if they develop mesothelioma, they will receive a 100% disability rating from the VA, and they will be eligible for benefits for the rest of their life on a monthly basis. And those benefits, when they pass away, get transferred to the spouse, and the spouse also has benefits that he or she will receive if they remarry. So that's another avenue of potential recovery for veterans.
Just to add to that a little bit, I mean, we are litigators, but we do this, we provide this service, the VA benefits service to our clients at no cost. We don't take any sort of recovery out of that. We think that we'll be able to get a good result for them through the civil tort system, and we feel that it's the right thing to do is to provide that to them at no cost.
You know, I think to add to that, a lot of people, and you know, over all these years, I've been meeting with people with mesothelioma. That first meeting, there's no two meetings that are the same, and many people have different levels of knowledge about the civil litigation system. But there are really two sort of tracks of recovery, and if you include the the veterans benefit, there's a third avenue. But many people have heard about the trust funds that are one avenue of recovery, and these are funds that have been set aside in where companies have filed for bankruptcy and courts have set up these trust funds. And what the trust fund is a fund that has been given an amount of money, and it invests money in various investments to maintain a level of funding to pay people who meet the criteria for those trust funds. So that if someone's exposed and has mesothelioma, and you can show that they were exposed to that company's product in some particular way, whatever the rules of the trust are, that's one avenue of recovery. And people often ask us, well, does that mean that is that the only recovery? And what we're trying to do in order to maximize the recovery is we will find as many of those trusts as we can that someone qualifies for, and some people do qualify for many of them. And separately, if the evidence supports it, on the other hand, there is the avenue that the civil litigation system, where you actually do file a lawsuit, and that's a different things. But both avenues can be followed at the same time, and we do that whenever possible in order to maximize the recovery for our clients. And similarly, for people who are veterans, we will also help file the VA claim as well, so that all of these things, so that the client can get relief, all the relief that's really due to them under the law. And we have a whole section of people whose job it is to meet the requirements of the trusts, investigators, and teams of investigators whose job it is to deal with satisfying the evidentiary requirements of those trusts. And then separately, we have, when our clients have a team, usually of lawyers working on their case, and at least one investigator who works on the civil litigation side, and that we will identify all of the potential companies, corporations whose asbestos products or who are responsible for those products, and proceed against those that we believe we can make the case against. And hopefully then there will be resolution with multiple different corporations who are responsible, so that we do everything we can to help the clients get what they need to in this time that they're going through.
That's really good to know, because I mean, I think, I can think of veterans who I've seen who almost kind of feel like they have to go it alone and deal with the VA themselves. And that's probably not, I'm sure, not the best way to approach this, right?
As a lawyer who often is trying cases for veterans, and I've represented, I mean, I'd say more than 50% of our clients end up being veterans, if I had to guess. I've had situations where claims that were made either by clients themselves, or even worse, people who they paid, where the person they paid to do their veterans benefit claim actually was used against them in their lawsuit. And the veterans benefit claim is typically very small compared to what they could have recovered, and we had to work very hard to overcome some of the things that the person who didn't know what they were doing, who was getting paid to file a VA claim, had done. So I would always recommend that you find someone with experience in dealing with this. I would not recommend anybody, some people do it because they started their benefit claim before they got mesothelioma, and then because they had a hearing loss, and then they ended up with mesothelioma and they had a second claim. But if at all possible, you should have an experienced lawyer working on all of your claims, so that, as Dave said, we do that for our veteran clients for free to help them with the VA, because it's just something that they don't need to deal with, and a lot of the evidence that they need is overlapped by what we're getting in the rest of our work. So it's something that it's a natural synergy, and we do that, and we're glad to do it.
Well, Thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot today from all of you. If there's any other major kind of topics you wanted to talk about that I missed, feel free to bring them out now. If there are other things that you wanted to mention.
One thing I know that that your colleagues wanted to have been receiving lots of questions about talc issues because it's become such a big issue in the news. And I do think we've touched on it a little bit, but I do want to make sure that as much as possible, what we're learning now about talc is also explaining a lot of situations. There's been for years in the scientific literature, there's been this category of people with mesothelioma where there wasn't any known exposure to asbestos, and so they were being called idiopathic or mesothelioma of unknown cause. And what this new information about talc is really opening up, and I hope that the medical and scientific community start to ask the people with mesothelioma about their talc exposures, because what I've learned from talking to doctors, epidemiologists, industrial medicine specialists is that they weren't asking about that. So that there's a potential missed exposure that leads to this what I think is becoming more and more recognized as a misconception, is that these people out there were not exposed to asbestos, when people like my client who was exposed only to Johnson's baby powder, that she would have been categorized 5 years before I met her as an unexplained mesothelioma. Now we know that it was the asbestos in the baby powder that she used daily for 40 years that was the cause of that mesothelioma. And so there is, when it comes to dealing with these talc cases, not every case where someone was exposed to talc is a case that we would recommend bringing against the company that made talc, because we need to look at the evidence. But it's something where everybody should consider it and think back to it. And sometimes, there even when it comes to some of these folks who don't know, that they'll say, I never used Johnson's baby powder or baby powder or some other brand. And it turns out if you ask mom, when they were a baby, they were using it. So this is something where the information, that's why we have to do these really in-depth investigations and talk to as many people as possible, family members. And so not every case where someone was exposed to talc is a talc-related asbestos mesothelioma, but it's certainly something that needs to be investigated. And I hope that in the medical and scientific community, it's becomes more and more of a focus, so that we understand, the origins of this disease. Although it obviously doesn't help cure it at this point, which is the ultimate goal. And I could speak for every person at my law firm that we would love to have to go to do some other kind of job and have mesothelioma go away, because it's a terrible disease. And we're proud to hopefully help a little bit support research to end it and put us out of business.
So true. And that's great information. And again, I think that really really highlights what I read off the foundation's website to start us off, that all mesothelioma patients are entitled to and should seek legal counsel, because it's certainly not up to me to know if a patient might have a case. So again, I think we have to remember that that statement. That's so true, and they should get to the experts like you. And again, it's been great to hear all of you talk. I think a lot of very similarly to the way I talk about mesothelioma, and that I'm very passionate about this disease. Ever since I started seeing cases out of my fellowship, and again, I think the major reason why is because we know that, again, these people got this cancer from something else that they were exposed to that they didn't really have any control over, right? Or know about. But for a lot of them just showing up to work every day or living with somebody who went to work every day or, you know, serve their country. So I think that's why so many of us feel that in terms of in the medical community, and I can tell now in the legal community, feel so passionate about helping these people and their families.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again for everybody's input today. It was, like I said, it was really enlightening and informative for me, and I'm sure for everyone who's going to be watching this. Thanks for spending the time with me, and let's keep doing our best for these folks.
Much so. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks, everyone.